Welcome to HortTube. My name is Jim Putnam. This is the weekly landscape update video that I do here in Raleigh, North Carolina, Zone 7B. We tend to just go around and show off a few of the things that are in peak color that we haven't shown for a while or in good shape for that time of year. One thing I haven't pointed out all season long is this skyscraper orange Salvia. This was planted back in the spring. This is one that's hardy in zone 7 to 10. It's an interesting color. I don't know if I'm super drawn to it, but it is one of the more interesting salvias that I've ever seen. I do like the color contrast. The calyx and the flower have a similar color to them. Normally the calyx is a little darker on some of these. I know this one won an award at the Georgia trials a few years back, and it is a super compact variety. The bees have loved it. Seen hummingbirds over here on it, and so it is a very attractive plant. But again, I don't know if I'm quite drawn to this color. Tell me what you guys think about this one. It's interesting for sure, and again, I love the habit of it. It's just, you know, a lot of these really stretch out quite a bit. The ultraviolet butterfly bush. This is a dwarf butterfly bush. That's a Southern Living Plant Collection one. Needs to be deadheaded. Has not been deadheaded recently. Which just means to take out some of those spent flower buds off of it. But that thing just blooms and blooms and blooms. That's as tall as it's gotten. Has not been pruned all season. And that's kind of the size and shape of it. I like to leave some of these ones that people call dwarfs alone and see what they actually do during the season. And that one actually seems to really stay that compact for a full year. And it's been in the ground for about a year and a half. So seems to be. But I am going to go ahead and cut it right now. I've got another month and a half or so for it to flush back out and really put on a show. And it is putting on a show. It's just mixed in with so many spent flowers at this point that I think I'll slow it down a bit and let it come out and be full flower again. We're going to talk a little bit about Celosia. The Celosia is perhaps the most popular thing in the garden for the bees, but you know, it has its ups and downs. Let's jump to another spot. Here's one of the Celosia that self-seeded this year, and it happens to come up in a spot where we could just let it go and grow. The native bees absolutely love this plant, and that's one of the reasons I've left it here. It is not a native, but the pollinators that are on it are natives, which is kind of interesting. Beautiful foliage. You know, flowers are all kinds of different shades of pinks and purples, and yet this one, of course, being yellow. What is your opinion of self-seeding annuals? Because this one will come up just all over the place. I mean, once you have it, it's easy to identify as a seedling, so it's easy to make the decision pretty early to pull them, but it does add a little bit of effort that following year. But if they find a little spot, a little cubby where, you know, they can grow, then look what this thing can do. And the pollinators, again, have been on it all year. And I think anybody that saw this would think we planted it here. So this is an interesting Celosia here. This was in a mix of flowers that Steph threw down over the rail back here just to mulch them in place, and this Celosia germinated from that. And it's not the most floriferous variety. You know, it has a very limited number of flowers on it. The pollinators do love them, same as the others, but it's really, this foliage is what's super interesting. See, the middle of that leaf has a kind of a purple splotch on it. Had several people tour the garden now and point this thing out in the last 2 years, because it's come back from seed two years in a row. It's 6 feet tall, which is kind of amazing. We tried to collect seed on this one last year, and the seed didn't germinate, so I don't know if I didn't wait long enough, didn't collect it, didn't do something to treat it. The other Celosias are easy, so I'm not quite sure what went wrong there. I'll try to figure it out again this year, because I very much like this, you know, this annual flower, and it's in a spot that for right now it can just come up and grow every year until we decide to do something different with it. But again, what do you guys think of self-seeding annuals? This is kind of a two-stage planting on this corner. This was giant zinnias all season. They've been absolutely beautiful. I've put lots of photos up on Instagram of them. You guys have seen them in these weekly update videos a couple of times. But the powdery mildew has definitely kicked in on them, and it's time for them to come out. But we actually underplant the giant zinnias with lantana. And this particular lantana is called Chapel Hill Miss Huff, which is kind of funny because there's a Chapel Hill Gold and then there's a Miss Huff. This is a sport of Miss Huff that has some more pink version of Miss Huff, just as cold hardy though. It's 5 feet tall because it's had these zinnias to support it and allow it to get up this high. But this is the plan. Every year we have a perennial lantana planted under the zinnias, and by the time the zinnias are fading in midsummer, the lantana will take over the bed. Both the zinnias and the lantana have hummingbirds on them every afternoon, bees and everything else too, but hummingbirds are especially drawn to this lantana. But I think this is an interesting one. I don't think I've pointed out this Chapel Hill Miss Huff lantana. So again, those giant zinnias were planted with the intent of having them be, 3 to 4 months and then them coming out. Well, why have I let them get that much powdery mildew on them and not pulled them out yet? Well, because the birds are taking those seeds. There's constantly birds on them, mostly goldfinches taking the seed. And it's the same thing with the sunflowers over here on this side of the property and several other annual and perennial things that I'm avoiding cutting back. So I've left a little more for the birds this season. It's just been a thought in my mind, is that, it's so easy to go through and just keep the garden so clean and so perfect, but that's just taking away from another thing that I really like to draw into the landscape, which is goldfinches and other birds that are after seed. And so that's the reason those zinnias haven't been pulled out yet, as bad as they honestly look over there. And the same thing with these sunflowers, which still have a few flowers opening, but for the most part are pretty spent at this point, and they're leaning over and all kinds of problems on them. But again, there's goldfinches on them every time we walk out. The white fruiting Calacarpa Americana is starting to show some color in the fruit. These bloom along the stems as the stems grow all season. So they've put on about 3 feet of growth since it woke up earlier in the spring. And as it grew all season long, the flowers were coming up the stems. All the pollinators absolutely love those flowers. And then toward the end of the season, it will finish off with just a little bit of growth right at the end. And the fruit will change all the way up the stem as the season goes on. So the birds don't get them all at one time. They'll get those oldest ones. I already see a few birds fighting over the ones in the center, and they'll slowly but surely come out. This plant was one that Buddy Lee gave me down in Louisiana a couple of years ago. It's super compact. It's just an amazing compact Calacarpa Americana. Sometimes this plant can get 12 by 12 and just be, kind of out of control and gangly. This one has fit perfectly where it is along the fence out by the road, and I can cut it down 3 or 4 feet during the winter time, and it'll just come right back to this height next year. Great for the birds, great for the pollinators all season long, and a native. We did these black-eyed Susan vines from seed. There's a guide wire out here by the road from a telephone pole. It's got wires running in every direction out here. This is urban space here in Raleigh, North Carolina. And with the intent of them covering the guide wire over the course of the summer, and that is now happening. They're about halfway up at this point, and lots more flowers every day on it. As it's getting up here into the sunlight, it's giving it energy down here to really start to produce more and more flowers. So, but looking good. I think that by another month or so, it will be most of the way up. There is a helianthus here, a Mexican sunflower that is starting to bloom. It was planted earlier in the season. I had kind of forgotten about it, but it's poked its head out here in the top and is starting to flower, and there's tons of buds on it. So it's really going to be just a big yellow, colorful spot here. There's a hibiscus back in the background of that. So a lot going on this section of the street. But I wanted to point out this black-eyed Susan vine, which we haven't shown since I think it was planted earlier in the spring. There's a giant Farfugium toward the back line in the garden, and we're probably only a couple of weeks away now from this thing starting to think about putting up flowers. These will bloom in the fall. Pollinators absolutely love them. This variety is called Marco. This is a selection of Gigantium, and the leaf. You can see this is the first full season in the ground, and it's probably 30 inches across, 30 inches this way. The leaves are, I'm going to guess about 8 to 10 inches across here. They'll be bigger next year when it goes to sleep again and comes back up again. But beautiful yellow, interesting flowers at a time of year when pretty much nothing else is blooming in the landscape. I've got a couple other Farfugium that are about to go in the ground, and there'll be a video, Farfugium specific video for those of you who aren't that familiar with them, but they make just great additions here to our southern gardens. The summer vegetable garden has been removed at this point, and the fall vegetables are going in. The beets have been seeded, carrots, I think collards and a few other things have been seeded at this point. Steph did most of that, has done most of that work this week. A little bit of new compost was laid down out here. All of the seedlings are up in the house from the video that went up last week on seed, starting seed for fall vegetables. So those seeds are up and in the house and ready to go in probably in another week or so. This area looks it doesn't look great. We definitely neglected the summer vegetable garden this year and are now recovering from that. And things came out a little earlier than they have in the past, but very quickly we'll have this recovered. One thing we have to do on the fall vegetable garden is get the fence around it for the rabbits. There's nothing that will come up in here that the rabbits won't eat, especially in the fall as the grass starts to slow down and their choices are limited. This vegetable garden will be at the top of their list when those carrots germinate. So you'll see a fence go up around this as well, and another video talking about the installation of the fall vegetable garden. Hosoba hoshifu, that is the name of this akuba, this Japanese akuba that was planted, I guess, a little over a year ago at this point. It was this tall from a 1 gallon container, if you've watched that video, and it's grown quite a bit. It's 2 feet tall at this point. I think I'm gonna cut this main leader in the late winter and get it to fill out a little more. It was under this Vitex, which got limbed up this past week, so it should fill in this area nicely over the next few years. It's got great color, much better than Gold Dust, which is the main variegated akuba that's sold on the market. The other plant I'd like to point out is this Beijing Beauty Mahonia, which is just an amazing, amazing plant. This one's a newer selection from the Southern Living Plant Collection. Blooms like mad. It's in flower right now in August, which is a very unusual time, honestly, for Mahonia to be blooming. But it's probably bloomed at least half the months that it's been in the ground. It's now about 3 feet wide and about 3 feet, a little less than 3 feet tall at this point. It's great texture, great color foliage, kind of a blue-green foliage, and then lots and lots of flowers that the pollinators absolutely love. So there's the update, guys, on the landscape here in Raleigh, North Carolina, Zone 7B. Again, we'll be back next week with another one. I try to show off some different plants each week throughout the landscape. Thanks for watching.